The first thing that I will say about this movie is it is worth watching on your own. Don't let my opinion blind you. The movie really deserves it. Not saying that the other things that I covered don't, but given the fact that this film is generally unknown, and if you do know it, there's a chance that you might see it in a very negative light, I think it deserves like a little bit of extra notoriety in that regard. No explicit spoiler warning, as I'm not really going to go too in-depth on it, but consider this a if you want to go in completely blind warning. If you're still here, let me explain the plot. A man by the name of John Quincy Archibald, played by Denzel Washington, works very hard to support his wife and son. Despite working really hard, they have a very poor economic situation. However, none of them really let that get them down, and they just go on living happy lives, especially John's son Mike, played by Daniel E. Smith, who has a generally big heart. However, tragedy strikes as Mike collapses during the middle of a baseball game. That statement about his heart wasn't figurative, it was literal. And due to this, Mike needs a heart transplant or else he will die. Now, heart transplants are obviously not cheap, and neither is the 30% down payment needed to put Mike on the transplant list. Now, of course, this is a shock and genuinely a bit tragic, but since John's been a loyal factory worker his whole life, he knows that at the very least, his health insurance plan can cover some of the bill in the meantime. However, his employer just changed to an HMO, meaning the payment he gets won't even cover half of the down payment. John does everything he can to try and get the money. Charity? Not enough. Welfare? He can't qualify. Sell everything he has? Not enough. All this while the hospital is telling him, you have until day X before we remove your son from the hospital. And right when John thinks he's starting to get on track to get enough money, he's being told that his son's being removed from the hospital that day, significantly earlier than the date that they told him that they were going to be putting his son out. Desperate times call for desperate measures, so John decides to take the ER hostage until his son gets put on a list. And it basically becomes a 90s hostage film for the remainder of its runtime, as that genre was just on its way out the door. It doesn't take two brain cells to figure out that the film is obviously a critique of the US healthcare system. A lot of time is spent either showing or telling the flaws of it, while not so subtly pushing for a very specific type of reform. Considering one of the first things that John says when he takes over the ER is, from now on, free healthcare for everyone. And since half of the hostages that he took are ER patients, he decides to help them based on their need of care, treating two guys who are bleeding out and a woman giving birth before he gets to the kid with an ear infection, as opposed to how deep any of their pockets are. And essentially all the people that he took hostage agree with him. I think the only one who doesn't agree with him is Dr. Raymond Turner, played by James Woods, and that's because he is the highest level of the hospital totem pole. Everyone else there is either a patient, as I said previously, or on an extremely low end of the hospital totem pole, like security guards, waitstaff, and nurses. In fact, one of the nurse characters, Steve McGuire, played by Kevin Connolly, is used very much to try and talk bad about the US healthcare system from within, going on a long-winded speech talking about how HMOs pay doctors to not do specific tests that might be necessary in exchange for a bonus at the end of the year. And also going on to say how many doctors and hospitals will actively try to push away people who need help but can't afford it, saying that all the hospital has to do is stabilize them, and then after that, they're off the hook. Dr. Turner keeps trying to deny this, but stated previously, he's one of the doctors that are really high on the hospital totem pole, who mostly deals with the rich patients. In fact, right before the hostage situation, he was having a conversation with one of his rich patients, talking about how they were going to play tennis later. And what was that rich patient in the hospital for? A heart transplant. Now, I think something like that actually leads into discussion of one of the big criticisms of this movie, one that I don't necessarily agree with. One of the most notable critiques of the film is Washington's performance rises above the material, but John Q pounds its audience over the head with its message. Here's the thing. That is 100% true. I mean, come on, like, it is very on the nose with a lot of its critiques. But honestly, I think that does this a little bit of justice, because this kind of contrasts from a lot of other Hollywood movies that have a semi-left leaning, but can't really veer too hard, because that might alienate some people who might not agree with the message, but this one just slaps you in the face with it. especially with an issue as pressing as healthcare. I mean, when almost 45,000 people die a year due to lack of healthcare and being screwed over by the health insurance providers, forgive the people who want to change that system for being a little bit preachy, especially considering that's the only criticism you can levy to that side, that you're being preachy in your message. Not that any of the information is inaccurate, because none of the information in there is inaccurate. HMO doctors denying patients for a raise, kicking patients out for stabilizing them, and, unbeknownst to the filmmakers at the time, somebody holding an ER at gunpoint when the hospital turned away their son. All that happening is perfectly fine, but when you're being preachy about it, oh no, that's where you're going too far. There's not much else to say except watch the movie for yourself and see what I mean. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.